Yo creo que la cámara sí tiene un problemita.
Aquí vamos a poner un ratito.
Ya sí, mejoró.
Por aquí ya se nos están uniendo también los panelistas que van a seguirlos a ustedes después de la conferencia introductoria. Bienvenida Ana María, bienvenida también Nina Paulik de la Universidad Técnica de Berlín, que nos va a acompañar también después. Y bueno, yo voy a correr aquí un ratico el
Ay,
video.
aquí está Dina Roll. Yo a Dina Roll la conozco.
Sí, Dina nos está acompañando como traductora.
Dina, hola, yo te conozco, ¿cierto?
Yo creo que no la puedes escuchar a menos que escojas el canal de traducción de inglés, David.
Hola Dina, aquí estoy.
Ahí sí la...
Bueno, saludos, me alegra verte.
Bueno.
Así sea tu nombre.
Yo voy a empezar a correr aquí un videito del foro, pero igual ya estamos todos ok para empezar en unos minuticos. ¿Bien?
Listo, súper. Tenemos 30 minutos, ¿cierto? Para esta primera entrevista.
Si nos pasamos unos minuticos de más, no hay problema.
Listo, no, pero hay que cumplirle a la agenda.
Perfecto. Buenos días, bienvenidos de nuevo al tercer día de la quinta edición del Foro Mundial de Low Carbon City. Este foro, como ustedes saben, es muy especial porque estamos celebrando 5 años como organización ciudadana, educando, movilizando la acción climática en todo el mundo. Este sueño que nació en Medellín hace ya 5 años ha movilizado más de 80.000 personas para la acción climática. Y bueno, en este tercer día estamos muy contentos de presentar un tema que es el desarrollo regenerativo, la cultura regenerativa. Y para ello nos acompaña David Escobar. David, yo quisiera que hoy entonces nos lleves, nos conduzcas hasta este mundo que es un poco nuevo para muchos de nosotros, pero que sin duda es un tema de mucho interés y que va a liderar muchísimas de las conversaciones que vamos a tener para trascender ese concepto de sostenibilidad. David, para quienes no lo conozcan, David es ingeniero de producción y tiene un máster en administración pública de Harvard Kennedy School. David tiene una trayectoria amplia, tanto en el sector público como privado. Él trabajó en todos los procesos de transformación urbana, desde la alcaldía de Sergio Fajardo en el 2004 y el 2007, donde él coordinó toda la estrategia de esos procesos que tuvieron que ver con la transformación de la ciudad. Y toda esa estrategia del miedo a la esperanza, y ahí también tuvo la oportunidad de liderar la campaña presidencial de Sergio Fajardo. David también coordinó toda esa estrategia de telecomunicaciones de la compañía de UNE, y asimismo pues ha liderado distintos procesos de planeación en el sector público y privado. Entonces, pues David, yo me puedo quedar aquí hablando de tu hoja de vida, pero tu rol actual pues ha sido desde el 2015 ese liderazgo desde COMFAMA, que es una organización que precisamente nos está haciendo la invitación a compartir y a trabajar desde un conocimiento colectivo, a compartir un conocimiento colectivo. Entonces, pues me gusta mucho que hoy nos acompañes pues a liderar esta conversación que justamente nos hace una invitación desde el desarrollo regenerativo a compartir y a liderar conversaciones en las que la sostenibilidad pues obviamente esté en el centro de la conversación, pero que la trascendamos mucho más para que desde ese rol que tienen las organizaciones podamos contribuir de una manera más importante, más precisa a este reto que tenemos de regenerar nuestro planeta. Entonces, David, bienvenido y adelante, por favor.
Bueno, Juliana, muchas gracias a ti y a todo el grupo de Low Carbon City por la invitación. Para mí es un honor muy grande estar unos minutos conversando con el profesor Daniel Wall, un hombre que admiramos, que nos gusta oír, seguir y leer. Un ejemplo para nosotros de lo que significa el desarrollo regenerativo y la cultura regenerativa, una inspiración para quienes creemos que hay que tomar acciones ciudadanas, tanto a nivel individual como a nivel organizacional, urgentes para salvar nuestro planeta. Hay que transformar rápidamente nuestra forma de entender muchos sistemas. Autor del famoso libro Diseñando Culturas Regenerativas, que es prácticamente una Biblia y una guía para quienes estamos hablando de regeneración desde las organizaciones, tanto sociales como empresariales. Es un gusto, profesor, estar aquí con usted, y gracias por animarse a compartir en español. Tenemos una audiencia que hay una buena parte que habla en español, y como vi que usted vivía en Mallorca, pues me atreví a hacerle esta invitación. Muchas gracias por aceptar pasarse a español.
Pues muchísimas gracias por invitarme, y es un placer practicar mi español con usted.
Bueno, tenemos media hora, entonces queremos aprovecharla. Yo voy a hacer unas preguntas, pero todo el mundo quiere escucharlo a usted. Yo hago parte, profesor, del movimiento global de capitalismo consciente. Es un movimiento de gente que cree que las empresas tienen que cambiar y lo tienen que hacer urgentemente. Y son personas que normalmente llevan ya muchos años, parece que son eras, hablando de sostenibilidad. Pero usted nos lleva un paso más allá. Usted nos lleva un paso más allá y nos habla de regeneración. ¿Por qué no nos explica un poco en esta primera pregunta de qué trata ese tema de la cultura regenerativa o del desarrollo regenerativo y cuál es su diferencia con el antiguo concepto ya, digo antiguo, aunque son pocos años, de sostenibilidad?
Pues primero me gustaría destacar que con esta moda de momento que todo el mundo quiere hablar de temas regenerativas, también caemos un poco en la trampa de, como siempre, cuando algo es nuevo, el antiguo lo desapreciamos. Y para mí es muy importante no desapreciar todo el trabajo que se ha hecho y se están haciendo en camino hacia la sostenibilidad. Voy a intentar compartir solamente una imagen porque para esta pregunta me ayuda mucho compartirlo. A ver si lo veis ahora.
Sí, señor, aquí estamos, perfecto.
Pues esta imagen es basado en el trabajo de Bill Reed y Ethan Rowland, y da todos estos temas del business as usual, de donde estamos ahora, hacia la regeneración en un espectro, que es un camino para andar. Incluso el paso hacia haciendo las cosas un poco más verde es un paso. Muchas veces lo desapreciamos y lo llamamos greenwashing, pero por lo menos las grandes empresas están empezando un camino en una dirección apropiada. La sostenibilidad en este esquema es el punto donde nuestra acción ya no añade daños adicionales a la tierra, a los ecosistemas, a las sociedades. Y como hemos hecho tanto daño durante tanto tiempo, esto ya no es suficiente. Tenemos un planeta que ya tiene casi solamente la mitad de los bosques que había hace 5.000 años. Y entonces hay que reforestar. Tenemos una tierra, un topsoil, tierra fértil, que no se queda muy fértil en muchos sitios y que está degenerando rápidamente. Entonces hay que reenterrar carbono de la atmósfera en el suelo. Y hay tantos temas, los ríos, los océanos, todos los ecosistemas ya están impactados por los seres humanos. Por eso a algunos científicos les gusta usar este concepto del antropoceno, pero para mí, incluso con este concepto, tenemos que tener cuidado, porque otra vez nos ponemos nosotros al centro. Y lo importante de la regeneración es poner la vida en el centro, entender que somos vida, como seres humanos formamos parte de la vida y somos productos emergentes de este proceso planetario que es la vida. Y nos toca sanar el proceso planetario de la vida en todos sus ámbitos, porque desde allí viene nuestra salud. Y entonces, en esta imagen he puesto los ODS al centro, porque en muchas maneras no hay que apreciar el gran esfuerzo que hemos hecho para llegar a estos metas que son los ODS, pero también, si se fijan bien, en el ODS 8 he puesto una imagen un poco diferente, porque no sé cómo se dice, llave inglesa, creo que se llama, una llave inglesa, porque este ODS para mí personalmente de continuar la obsesión con el crecimiento económico medido por el PIB, no me parece que cae con todo este proceso. Es justamente esta obsesión que nos ha llegado a degenerar el planeta y degenerar nuestras comunidades. Es imposible crecer infinitivamente en un planeta finito. Hay que redefinir qué es el proceso económico, qué es el suceso económico y tenemos que redefinir qué tipo de crecimiento queremos. Tampoco quiero decir que no queremos crecimiento, pero de bosques, de tierra fértil, de comunidades sanas, no
Del
de
agua.
PIB. Pues
Claro.
sí, y una cosita más que también en este cambio es cambiar las metáforas, cambiar desde metáforas que son mecanistas, que solamente se basan en tecnología, hacia metáforas que se basan en la vida, porque con esas metáforas ya vamos a pensar de manera diferente. También no soltar la importancia de Big Data y de data cantitativa, pero también darnos cuenta si solamente porque es más fácil coleccionar data cuantitativa, hemos perdido la vista a las calidades. Y lo que de verdad nutre la salud humana y planetaria y de ecosistemas son las calidades de las relaciones. Son cosas que son mucho más sutiles que se puede captar en fichas Excel. Y por eso también es muy importante darse cuenta, también en términos de crecimiento, de un crecimiento económico cuantitativo hacia un crecimiento económico cualitativo. Y también en este proceso hay un paso muy importante. Una vez que vamos de la sostenibilidad al restaurativo, de regenerar ecosistemas, es posible todavía hacerlo y hacerlo bien incluso, pero desde el punto de vista de un ingeniero. Hay que plantar X millones de árboles, pam, pam, muy rápido para captar carbono. Parece bien, pero si lo hacemos en esta actitud, perdemos la conexión con la unicidad del hogar, con las condiciones específicas de ecosistemas y de las culturas. Y tenemos que hacer un cambio interior, que es darnos cuenta que somos vida y como vida podemos generar condiciones conducentes a la vida, pero con humildad y no como dueños sobre la naturaleza. Y ahora dejo a compartir, así mejor.
Muchas gracias, doctor Wall, por esa introducción tan potente. Y los indígenas amazónicos, las culturas amazónicas dicen mucho eso, doctor Wall, dicen, la naturaleza no es de nosotros somos de la naturaleza. Y me
Absolutamente.
recuerda eso. Y oigo en su lenguaje algo que me parece tremendamente poderoso para la audiencia y es esa mezcla de ciencia con humanismo y ciencia digamos, incluso con poesía, en el sentido que plantea de la metáfora. Yo al leer sus textos encuentro la palabra colaboración, la palabra sanación, la palabra reconciliación. Muchas veces encuentro interconexión y participación y también incluso veía que usted habla de alguien que admiramos mucho en Medellín, en particular donde yo trabajo en COMFAMA, que es Humberto Maturana, el biólogo chileno, y habla de amor. Entonces quisiera que nos hablara un poquito de por qué ese lenguaje, de dónde vienen esas palabras, donde mezcla, como usted dice, el Big Data, la ciencia más avanzada, con una manera distinta de ver nuestra relación con el mundo.
Porque estoy convencido de que las metáforas son muy importantes, el lenguaje es muy importante. Como Humberto Maturana dice que nosotros, no sé cómo lo dice en castellano, en inglés es bringing forth a world en conversación.
Sí, él dice que creamos el mundo, nosotros creamos el
Es
mundo.
justo, es en nuestras relaciones, en conectar con el otro, co-creamos el mundo. Hasta la teoría de Santiago dice que en el momento que el organismo se distingue con su medio ambiente, se está creando esta polaridad de que toda la vida está en la polaridad entre ser por uno mismo y ser como parte de un todo. Y el todo está afectado no solamente por las cosas que hacemos, pero la manera en que estamos. Y esto es un cambio de corazón, esto es un cambio profundo de conciencia y no solamente de data y de ciencia pura y dura de análisis. Pero ambos son importantes. Y me gusta que me preguntes por eso, porque esto fue un poco el lema que me puse para escribir el libro, crear este puente de la ciencia hasta, incluso me voy a atrever a decir la palabra, hasta la espiritualidad, hacia la visión del mundo, la manera en que vemos el mundo. Porque es muy importante darse cuenta que nuestra obsesión por la tecnología, que nos va a salvar la tecnología, si tenemos más inteligencia artificial y más big data y todo esto, es en alguna manera una nueva religión inconsciente. Es un ateísmo que dice que no existe nada espiritual, pero la manera en que la usamos y para qué los usamos, para vivir toda la vida como los locos de la Singularity University que quieren, como Ray Kurzweil, que está esperando que ya inventamos para que él pueda descargar su conciencia a un robot. Esto es justamente lo mismo que todas las religiones querían comprometer la vida eterna, pero lo buscamos a través de la tecnología y hay que tener cuidado en esto. Oh, yo soy un hombre del siglo XXI, no pienso en cosas espirituales ni la religión es para tontos, que como hay mucha gente que piensan así, pero la realidad es que hemos hecho la tecnología nuestra religión y estamos subserviendo un sistema que es útil, pero debe ser servidor de la humanidad y no la humanidad servidor de ella.
Muy poderoso, muchísimas gracias. Doctor Wall, desde el nivel, un par de inspiraciones que le queremos pedir, una desde el punto de vista individual, como una persona desde su círculo de influencia puede ser empezar a vivir de una manera más regenerativa, desde la vida en la ciudad, por ejemplo, aprovechando que estamos con Low Carbon City. Y una pregunta complementaria, ¿cómo un líder de una organización, de una empresa, de una universidad puede liderar un proceso de, usted usa una palabra que a mí, un par de cosas que a mí me impresionan positivamente. La primera usa la palabra design, diseño, ¿cierto? Y la segunda, ya para el otro comentario, es sobre, la pregunta es desde el nivel personal y desde el nivel como del liderazgo, consejo para individuos y consejo para líderes. Pero para líderes usa una expresión que me toca mucho y es la del precautionary principle, como el principio de precaución en español. Y eso plantea como una reflexión también, diría yo, ética, no solo técnica, sino ética, porque el principio de precaución no, es que aún la ciencia no sabe, pero yo tengo dudas, te entiendo por ahí. Te hago esa invitación, un consejo para individuos en la vida en la ciudad y un consejo para líderes, y si te suena esa pregunta que te provoco alrededor del principio de precaución, sería muy valioso.
Pues detrás de ambas, tengo que destacar algo más de qué es un trabajo de manera regenerativa. Como he dicho, la vida es un proceso planetario y todos formamos parte de ese proceso evolutivo. Trabajar de manera regenerativa significa siempre empezar con el lugar. La información tiene que ver con la unicidad del lugar y la unicidad de todas las personas en este lugar. Entonces, se trabaja no como respuesta a un problema. No se trata de, tenemos el gran problema del cambio climático o de la pérdida de biodiversidad, que son problemas reales y no quiero disminuirlos. Pero para conectar con uno mismo y para co-crear, trabajar desde el potencial en vez del problema es mucho más poderoso. Y esto es para seres individuales, individuos en la sociedad o líderes. Cada uno puede ser un líder en su vida diaria, en conectar con su comunidad. Y como en mi libro hay 250 preguntas y una de las lemas que se extiende a través del libro es que quizás estamos demasiado enfocados en las respuestas y las soluciones. Pero la historia nos dice que casi todos los problemas de hoy se han desarrollado a través de soluciones del pasado. Entonces, ¿cómo vamos a decir nosotros mismos con arrogancia que ahora tenemos la solución sostenible o regenerativa para siempre y ya sea, podemos vivir felizmente para siempre? Es mucho más poderoso dar de una generación a la siguiente un catálogo de preguntas que nos deberíamos hacer que respuestas o lemas o pautas. Y es justamente este proceso de invitar, sea viviendo en la ciudad, tu barrio, o un proceso con multi-stakeholder, con las empresas, la administración pública y organizaciones de la ciudadanía, de vivir en este lugar. Y para mí es siempre, si trabajamos con ciudades, es siempre importante no desconectarlas con su bioregión. Ya hace más de 100 años, el escocés Patrick escribió un libro, Cities in Evolution, Ciudades en la Evolución. Y él fue la primera persona que dijo que las ciudades tienen que plantearse en su sitio, que es la bioregión, desde las montañas hacia el mar, que es el río, que es la cauce del río donde está ubicada la ciudad, y cómo puede la ciudad ser el motor económico, pero también un impacto salutogénico a su alrededor, de sanar los ríos, sanar los bosques, sanar las tierras. Es la escala adecuada para la economía circular, no es la nacional, es la escala de bioregión a través de las ciudades. Yo personalmente pienso que en el futuro vamos a ver un sistema de producción que es mucho más regionalizado. No quiere decir que no vamos a tener negocios internacionales y movimiento de productos, pero es mucho más resiliente producir en la región para la región, especialmente cosas importantes que tienen que ver con la soberanía alimentaria, soberanía de agua, soberanía de educación y energética. Y bueno, entonces estoy un poco mezclando las
pero
respuestas.
está increíble.
Pero sí, lo dejo aquí, pero había otra cosa, pero ya no me acuerdo qué quería decir.
No, estuvo maravilloso y ese concepto de bioregión y de interconexión, y también conectas con un poco lo que decías en la primera respuesta que nos diste, y es que lo importante no es estar bueno o malo, sino tener las preguntas e ir en la dirección correcta. Yo creo que ahí señalas unos puntos muy valiosos para nosotros. La otra pregunta que te hacía era sobre el tema organizacional y el principio de precaución, el tema
Sí,
para líderes. Si te
sí.
gustaría elaborar sobre eso, aunque tengo otras por aquí, porque esta conversación es muy emocionante.
Sí. Cuando yo, entre 2004 y 2006, estuve haciendo mi doctorado en la Universidad de Dundee, y pensé que voy a crear un doctorado a través del diseño, porque también me has preguntado del diseño, y yo creo que todos somos diseñadores. Todo lo que vemos alrededor de nosotros es un mundo diseñado por alguien, y nos diseña también cómo vemos el mundo. Hay un feedback loop, un bucle de retroalimentación entre la manera en que vemos el mundo y el mundo que creamos. Y después el mundo que creamos influye cómo vemos el mundo. Y es muy importante darse cuenta de esto y de que no solamente se trata en el diseño de crear productos bellos, es cualquier cosa que hacemos, nuestros sistemas de transporte, nuestros patrones políticos, todo esto son diseños que afectan la vida. Y cuando terminé mi doctorado, ya tenía esta sensación, ya no usaba la palabra regenerativa, pero no me gustaba la sostenibilidad porque quería saber qué vamos a sostener, de qué habla de verdad la sostenibilidad. Entonces, al final mi doctorado se llamaba Design for Human and Planetary Health, diseño para la salud humana y planetaria. Y este concepto de salud es muy clave porque la salud es un producto emergente a diferentes niveles del sistema complejo en el cual participamos, que es este proceso de la vida o proceso planetario. Y si nos preguntamos en cada acto, esto contribuye a la salud de mi comunidad, mi bioregión y del planeta. Esto es en alguna manera el principio de precaución que viene de los médicos,
Sí.
que dicen, si no sabemos que algo no tiene impacto negativo, mejor no hacerlo. Pero hemos hecho al revés. Y claro, hay límites.
En español decimos también, Daniel, decimos ante la duda, abstenerse. Si
Sí.
esto podría hacer daño, mejor no hacerlo.
Sí.
Muy poderoso ese tema del principio de precaución. El concepto que he propuesto yo donde trabajamos, o que me han propuesto a mí, donde trabajo yo en COMFAMA, es que la salud es la posibilidad de disfrutar la vida. No la ausencia de enfermedad, sino la posibilidad de disfrutar la vida. Y la vida no solo la vida humana, sino la riqueza amplia de la vida.
Sí, gracias. Por eso es muy importante. Hay varios lineajes del trabajo regenerativo y este matiz evolutivo de desarrollo también requiere un concepto nuevo de qué es la salud. No es volver a un estado que está rígido, que es soy una persona con salud, o un ecosistema con salud. La salud es algo dinámico, que en sí mismo es evolutivo. Y hay un científico israelí que en los años 60 escribió un libro sobre el concepto de la salutogénesis. En vez de tener un enfoque a la salud que es patogénico, que dice que hay enfermedades y tenemos que tratar los síntomas de las enfermedades, da la vuelta al concepto, que ve la salud como algo dinámico, que todos vamos a tener brotes de no estar en buena salud, pero la salud es poder tener la resiliencia de poder volver a este nivel dinámico, de poder continuar nuestro camino. Entonces, este concepto de salutogénesis o diseño salutogénico, de cómo vamos a crear sistemas más saludables a través de la educación, a través de la regeneración de bosques, tierras y ecosistemas. Esto para mí es el proceso de regenerar el planeta y para mí, en una frase, nuestro reto es rediseñar la presencia y el impacto humano en el planeta dentro de las vidas de las generaciones que viven de momento en el planeta. Tenemos 20, 30 años, 40 años para dar la vuelta a cómo somos como seres humanos aquí en este planeta. Y has mencionado los tribus amazónicos. La manera de trabajar en una manera regenerativa no es algo nuevo, es algo muy antiguo también. Todos los pueblos indígenas en todo el mundo han sido pueblos bioregionales, han sido conectados profundamente con los ecosistemas que ellos no vieron, como tú bien has dicho, como que sean suyos o un recurso. Al revés, todos los pueblos indígenas ven las montañas, los ríos, los bosques como sus ancestros, que nos dan información cómo vivir bien, y hay que cuidar este lineaje y que, como también tú has dicho, no pensar que la tierra es de nosotros somos de la tierra. Y solamente este cambio es el cambio para mí principal y más clave para poder crear culturas regenerativas. Y hacerlo en cada lugar. No hay un receto que te puedo dar y me has hablado de culturas regenerativas, dame las pautas, ¿qué tengo que hacer? Tú lo tienes que hacer con tu comunidad, en tu sitio, y lo que va a salir va a ser diferente. Por eso el libro tiene un plural y no un singular.
Sí, a mí me encanta el plural y creo que nos has dado además un regalo muy importante al hablarnos de la importancia de las preguntas. El fundador del Museo Cosmocaixa de la Ciencia de Barcelona, Jorge Wagensberg, decía que cambiar de preguntas es revolución. Cambiar de preguntas es una revolución. Y, y aunque tenía un par de preguntas más, se nos va agotando el tiempo. Quería hablar, en alguna parte de tu libro vi un comentario sobre que no solo estamos perdiendo la diversidad natural, sino también la diversidad cultural. Y eso me recordó al antropólogo canadiense Wade Davis, que en su libro Wayfinders habla de la importancia de la atmósfera y dice que cada que se pierde una cultura, una lengua, es como si cayera una bomba encima del Museo del Louvre en París. Y tenía una pregunta con eso, pero tal vez la dejo ahí, como ese tema de cómo el diseño del sistema político social también disminuye la diversidad cultural y económico. Pero
Por eso
como se
me
nos
gusta que
acaban,
por lo menos estamos hablando en castellano y no en inglés, porque
así es.
esto de que todo el mundo tiene que hablar en inglés es parte
Sí,
de esta pérdida de diversidad de lenguaje. Yo vivo en Mallorca y está muy vivo aquí en Mallorca y también en Cataluña el tema del español y del catalán.
claro.
Cada lenguaje nos da una manera de ver el mundo y de participar en el mundo. Y cuando perdemos un idioma, perdemos, como tú bien has dicho, es como una bomba cae en el Louvre,
Una, un-
mucho más.
Una riqueza infinita, de acuerdo. Y yo al principio te iba a hacer una pregunta de cierre que era, danos ideas para sanar el mundo, pero te la voy a cambiar, porque tú me has dado el regalo de la pregunta y me has recordado la importancia de la pregunta y es, danos preguntas para sanar el mundo. Haznos preguntas que nos las llevemos para la casa, para la empresa, para donde estemos en nuestro espacio. Preguntas que nos pongan a pensar sobre cómo sanar el mundo. Algunas que nos dejes como para que nos quedemos procesando.
Bueno, como he dicho, hay 250 en mi libro. Sí, sí, sí. Y también tengo un blog por Medium que
Sí, sí.
casi siempre pongo preguntas, pero por la manera que has puesto tu pregunta, mi pregunta sería, quizás puede ser que somos equivocados en intentar salvar el mundo y que solamente vamos a tener éxito que nos enfocamos a salvar lugares. Puede ser que es posible que no se puede salvar el mundo, pero sí se puede salvar lugares y que tenemos que empezar desde la unicidad de nosotros mismos y del lugar para tener éxito en hacerlo.
Increíble, doctor Wall. Muchas gracias por estos 30 minutos de conversación estimulante. Los invito a todos los que nos oyen a que sigan su blog en Medium. Es increíble, hay muchas reflexiones, muchas preguntas, pero también muchas sacudidas al statu quo científico, económico y cultural en el que está el mundo occidental. De verdad que es un honor haber compartido con usted, profesor Wall, y ojalá podamos seguir en contacto porque nosotros, muchas de las organizaciones que ayudamos a realizar y a patrocinar este encuentro, creemos que sí, podemos tener 20 o 30 años, pero hay que empezar ya, hay que empezar ayer.
Sí.
Y tal vez lo dijo usted en algún video que le escuché, estamos tarde para empezar.
Sí.
Muchísimas
Bueno,
gracias.
gracias a ti.
Hasta luego.
Muchas gracias. Yo me uno a esa invitación que hace David a que este sea un momento inicial, pero que estas conexiones se mantengan. Y de nuevo, gracias David por haber aceptado esta invitación y al doctor Daniel también. Muchas gracias por unirse a esta causa que movilizamos los ciudadanos y a este proceso en el que nos conectamos, pero que deriva de muchas nuevas acciones y de procesos y de desencadenamiento de proyectos e iniciativas que luego se podrán materializar en otros proyectos. Muchas gracias por esa introducción y por esa invitación a la unicidad. Y me uno a esa invitación a seguir el blog de Daniel y también a quienes tengan la oportunidad de leer su libro Diseñando Culturas Regenerativas. Valentina ahí nos ayudó a poner las indicaciones en el chat para que puedan tener más información. Bueno, David, muchas gracias y muchas gracias por el apoyo también de COMFAMA para que pudiéramos hacer posible este evento. Bueno, me gustaría entonces, para darle continuidad a nuestro evento, darle la bienvenida a una querida amiga, Andrea Sangil, que va a presentar nuestro próximo panel. Andrea además fue la coordinadora del Foro Mundial el año pasado en Costa Rica, entonces pues tengo el gusto de invitarla de nuevo. Andrea tiene una maestría en sostenibilidad, en planificación y política ambiental de Cardiff en Reino Unido. Tiene una experiencia muy bonita también en estos procesos de movilización ciudadana y fue fundadora del Centro para la Sostenibilidad Urbana y cofundadora de Agile City en Costa Rica. Tiene más de 10 años trabajando por el desarrollo de políticas y planes en movilidad urbana, cambio climático, planificación urbana. Tiene experiencia con organismos internacionales, entre ellos la GIZ, el Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo, Naciones Unidas para el Ambiente, The Nature Conservancy, C40, entre otras. Es miembro de la comunidad global de Global Shapers del Foro Económico Mundial desde el 2012. Y bueno, André, qué rico que estés aquí, bienvenida. Estoy muy contenta de que podamos compartir este espacio de nuevo y bueno, bienvenida a que nos presentes este siguiente panel. Aquí te estoy dando la autorización para compartir la pantalla.
Bueno, muy buenos días. Creo que mi video todavía no lo puedo activar. Si me ayudan con eso. ¿Sí me escuchas?
Sí, te escuchamos bien. Yo creo que ya puedes compartir el video.
A ver. Ahora sí, ahora aquí estoy. Bueno, muchísimas gracias y bienvenidos y bienvenidas a todas las personas que nos acompañan el día de hoy. Hoy el panel lo vamos a tener en inglés. Tenemos un par de personas que solo hablan inglés, entonces me voy a pasar al inglés. Pero les agradezco muchísimo la atención. Today we're going to talk about regenerative development and just linked to the previous conversation, I wanted to touch upon the global assessment report on biodiversity and ecosystem services that was launched and published by the IPBES, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And it tells us that almost 1 million species are at risk of extinction. And WWF also recently published, about a couple of weeks ago, the Living Planet Index, which tells us that it's 68% of the global biodiversity has been lost in the past 50 years. And nature is the foundation of our livelihoods, of our societies, of our economies, and it's critical to our health, our well-being, the sustainability of our urban lives, but it's being lost at unprecedented rates. So many of the drivers for biodiversity loss, both direct or indirect, are linked to urban development. And that's why I think this panel is so relevant. The next few decades will be the most rapid period for urban population growth in human history. Human growth has been responsible for the loss of natural habitat in the last decades for almost 16% of all the natural habitat lost. For example, in between 1992 and 2000 was linked to urban development and urban growth. And it could threaten a lot more if it's not contained, if it's not planned, if it's not redesigned and rethought, or if it continues to be as poorly planned as we have done so until now. So the world is not facing only an economic crisis or a health crisis, it's also facing a climate crisis and a biodiversity crisis. And the interconnectedness between urban growth and these crises is very clear. So one of the solutions is trying to consolidate these agendas, right? So we need to consolidate the urban agenda with the climate agenda, with the biodiversity agenda. And one of the ways to do it, and that has come up now, is regenerative development. So I think we have an amazing panel right now that will help us think a little bit more about that and understand the principles of regenerative development. And one of the first panelists that will be presenting. Here is Marta, we have on screen, we have Anna, we have Nina, and we have Sam. If you can all come on screen, I'd like to welcome you. We're gonna start with Ana Maria Hernandez. She is a specialist in international relations. She is currently the president of the Intergovernmental Platform of Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, the IPBS. And previously, she held the position of Head Office International Affairs, Policy and Cooperation at the Alexander von Humboldt Biological Resources Center. So I would like to welcome Anna. You have 10 minutes for your presentation, and then we'll continue with the next panelists.
Okay, thank you very much. Primero que todo, un abrazo cordial a todos mis colegas que hablan español y a mis compatriotas en Colombia. Es un placer, como siempre, estar cerca de la gente linda del país y de toda la región de América Latina y el Caribe. Voy a pasar a hablar en inglés, ya que este panel pues, es en inglés. So thank you very much for this invitation. And on one hand, it is marvelous to be with you, having this opportunity to exchange about biodiversity richness, and of course, the contributions that nature gives us in terms of food, protection, regulation, support, and of course, inspiration. But by the other hand, how sad is to see how we are facing unprecedented destruction of our nature. It is incredible how the humanity can change its own capacity to live in harmony with nature, with tremendous impacts in the biodiversity, in the ecosystem services, and in our own capacity of survival. The imminent decline of biodiversity at its various contributions that nature provides, which directly results in direct deterioration of our own quality of life, is not something theoretical. We are living that in our own reality, in our daily life. Having this sad picture in our lives is totally necessary to reaffirm the need to take decisions based on the best available scientific information and evidence, yes, but also the best practice information and evidence. That in that sense, I really appreciate the opportunity that you are giving today to IPBES to express what have been our findings. The work of IPBES, the Intergovernmental Platform of Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, has been focused on determining the knowledge gaps and needs, conducting assessments with existing information according to priorities, building capacity for decision makers, experts, and stakeholders, and providing spaces for understanding tools and methodologies that support policy decisions. In doing so, IPBES has produced thematic and methodological assessments, as well as the regional and global assessments. In this journey, in addition to the 137 member states, we have involved around 2,000 experts from more than 100 countries from different disciplines of knowledge, including natural sciences, social sciences, human, economic, and political sciences, and also experts of indigenous and local communities that have contributed with diverse range of knowledge systems to our process. So, as I said, we approved in May 2019 our last assessment, the global assessment. And as you said, this assessment found out that around 1 million animals and plant species are now threatened with extinction, many within decades. And that is more than even before in human history. The assessment authors also have ranked for the first time at this scale, at a global scale, and based on thorough analysis of the available evidence, the 5 main direct drivers of change in nature. Those are the change in land and sea use change, the direct exploitation of organisms, the climate change, the pollution, and invasive alien species. And of course, that is at a global scale, but this rank can differ in regions or in countries. So those 5 direct drivers results from an array of underlying causes that we call the indirect drivers of change, which are in turn underpinned by societal values and behaviors that include production and consumption patterns, for example, human population dynamics and trends, as you said, trade, technological innovations, and local through and global governance. So the rate of change in the direct and indirect drivers differs among regions and countries, as I said, and unsustainable use of the earth resources is underpinned by a set of demographic and economic indirect drivers that have increased and that furthermore interact in complex ways, including, of course, through trade. It's important to state that in the past 50 years, in this very short period of time, the human population has doubled. The global economy has grown nearly 4-fold, and global trade has grown 10-fold, together driving up the demand for energy and materials in only 50 years. So countries at different levels of development have experienced different levels of deterioration of nature for any given gain in economic growth. To reverse the process, in addition to a specific planning, development, policy, and environmental tools, comprehensive transformative changes are needed for human beings to generate conscious processes to reduce the accelerated trends of drivers of biodiversity loss. These transformative changes, and one example of the transformative changes are these regenerative solutions and spaces that you are presenting today in this forum. So I congratulate for this innovative form to move forward. Conservation actions, not only in protected areas, but in all ecosystems, including urban ones, includes efforts to manage unsustainable use and address the illegal capture and trade of species and the translocation of eradication of invasive species are key actions that we are doing right now, but we have to increase. Alternative models and measures of economic welfare are increasingly considered as possible approaches to balancing economic growth. So we have a lot of examples that we can use to tackle these transformative changes. Our assessment and the IPBES proposes 5 main interventions that can generate transformative changes, such as incentive and capacity building. One very important, cross-sectoral cooperation. Other one, preemptive and precautionary actions in regulatory and management institutions and businesses. Other one, decision-making in the context of resilience and uncertainty, and of course, the implementation of the environmental law. So we must dare to review what has been done so far. We have to reaffirm the positives and recognize the failures. It's very important for us to be honest with ourselves, to work with as individuals, as a families, as a society, as a sectors, and between sectors. We must rethink ourselves as a species in order to remain sustainable in the future. And if you don't want to use the term sustainable in order to be in the capacity of more than a survival eco, we must change unhealthy habits to healthy ones. We must consume and produce responsibly. We have to incentivize economic systems based on harmonious relationship with our biodiversity and services. At this point in time, ladies and gentlemen, business as usual is not longer the option. So the situation is urgent, yes, very, very urgent, but the solutions are possible and viable. You have the mechanisms and the unique opportunity to change paradigms and generate a better future for our society. I'm sure that your knowledge, because all of you here have a lot of knowledge from different perspectives, will be the basis to develop concrete scenarios of plausible futures and to redirect the current trends of biodiversity loss and therefore the negative impacts on human development by addressing the direct and the indirect drivers that transforms our biodiversity and turning the negative impacts to transit towards sustainable solutions based on the basic relation between humans and nature. And yes, we are not the leaders of the nature. We are part of the nature. We don't have to forget that. I wish you the very best and thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Anna, for that introduction. I think it was very comprehensive of the principles of regenerative design and also how we are placed right now in a moment where the paradigm shift needs to happen. And I think Marta will give us some ideas on how to change that paradigm shift because business as usual, as you said, Anna, is no longer an option. So we need to rethink how our economic systems, our political systems, our development systems start to how to change those. So Marta Santamaria, welcome. Marta is a policy director of the Natural Capital Coalition. And she has 15 years of experience promoting environmental economics and natural capital valuation, both in the public and private sector. And before she worked in the coalition, she used to be the scientific project officer for the European Commission's Institute for Energy and Transport. And in the past, she has worked with other companies such as WC, the Spanish National Research Center for Energy, Environment and Technology, la Red Eléctrica de España in the Universidad de Alcalá, and she has a PhD in Global Change and Sustainable Development from the University of Alcalá in Spain. So welcome, Marta, and you have 10 minutes as well.
Muchas gracias, Andrea, y al igual que Ana María, encantada de saludar a todo el mundo en español, pero bueno, me voy a pasar al inglés, aunque justo en la entrevista anterior hemos dicho que era pobreza de lenguaje, pero al menos podemos llegar a más gente. Entonces, muchas gracias, felicitar a los organizadores y un placer estar aquí en este panel para discutir sobre estos temas. So, thank you very much. As Ana Maria, it was wonderful to set the scene and see where we are. And one of the areas mentioned by Ana Maria is that we need to change the decisions. So the Capitals Coalition is really focused in the how, as Andrea mentioned, how we are going to make this transformation. So the reason that motivates our activity at the Capitals Coalition is that we recognize that as society, as Ana Maria mentioned, we are failing in tackling and addressing the big global challenges that are climate change, biodiversity loss, and raising inequalities. And the reason is because decisions are taken ignoring the relevant information. So what we are proposing is to include the value of nature, people, society, and economy in all decisions that are taken by all the main decision makers that are businesses, finance, and governments. So we need to incorporate these 4 elements, as I mentioned, the value of nature, people, society, and the economy. How we are working at the Capitals Coalition, we recognize that we need a system change. So that's why we need the views and the contribution of all of us, because we think that we are going to manage to find a solution if we collaborate between all of us, and we need the perspectives of everyone. So we are going to reach, we have some urgency. So we need to collaborate to benefit from the synergies and find solutions all together. So that's why the collaboration, the coalition is an initiative of collaboration, bringing together the views of finance, business, governments, accounting and standard setters, multi-stakeholder groups, the science and academia, as well as the views from the civil society. So what we are, our ambition is that in 10 years, so as I mentioned, we have some urgency. In 10 years, we want to reach a point in which the majority of business, finance, and governments are including all the capitals, all these elements that I mentioned, people, nature, society, and economy in all their decisions. And this will deliver a fair, just, and more sustainable world. So we need to move, as you can see in this figure, we have been in the last years in a space of things could be done in a better way. So we need now to move into things should be done in a different way, and decisions should take into account the value of all the capitals. And finally, we need to, in 5 years' time, be in a space of decisions must be incorporating the value of all the capitals. So how are we going to progress during the coming years? We are working in trying to address several pillars, because in the center of all what we have to reach is to change the system. And for that, we need to change the math. So we need to reshape how business, finance, financial markets, and governments identify, measure, and value their relationship with nature, people, and the economy. We need also to change the conversation. So we need to work in developing influential communications and growing a dynamic and supportive community. This should not be just small groups trying to claim, but it should be transversal, and it should be in all the conversations to create a shared value for everyone. We need also to change the rules. So the governments have an important role here to create an enabling environment by reshaping the motivations and incentives that drive decision-making. And all these pieces will contribute to change the system. It will be a system that is reflecting the true value of nature, people, and the economy in all decisions. So for this, to change the systems, we are proposing a capitals approach. So we are referring to the capitals. The capitals are these 4 elements that are critical for the continuation of our lives. So we need the natural capital, that is the stock of renewable and non-renewable natural resources that combine to yield a flow of benefits to people. We also need the people. We need the human capital, so the knowledge, skills, competencies, and attributes embodied in individuals that contribute to an improved performance and well-being. We need the social capital. The social capital is like the glue that keeps everything together through the networks, together with shared norms, values, and understanding that facilitate the cooperation within the groups, but also among groups. And we also need the produced capital, that is the one that we are already taking systematically in our decisions, but we need to be more holistic. So the produced capital is the man-made goods as well as financial assets that are used to produce goods and services consumed by society. So as I mentioned, the way in which we need to change decisions, we can do it using a capital approach. And this will imply 3 main shifts. So first, we need to understand our relationship with these capitals. We need to understand which are our impacts, and especially which are our dependencies. When we recognize that we depend on nature and people is when they become critical. It's something that we have to address on a Monday morning. It cannot wait for a Friday afternoon. So it's when we recognize that it should be embedded in our decisions. When we say that we need to understand the impacts and dependencies, we need proper information, as Ana Maria was mentioning, to take decisions. For that, we need to measure and value these impacts and dependencies. When we refer to evaluation, we are referring to understanding the relative importance and worth of these impacts and dependencies, and that will help us to transform the way in which we act. And finally, we need to have a system approach. So there are many interconnections between all these elements. So we have been talking about climate change, biodiversity conservation, inequality. We need to understand all these risks and opportunities and connections between them. We cannot continue using a siloed approach. So this is a figure of connecting all the elements that I have been describing. So as I said, we need to understand our relationship with the capitals, the impacts and dependencies. We need to measure and value them. And we have published, as the Capitals Coalition have published the Natural Capital Protocol to help businesses understand how to conduct this process of measuring and value impacts and dependencies on the different capitals. And the aim is to transform the way in which we take decisions. We believe that by changing the decisions, we will be able to change our strategies in the medium and long term. And this will help us to have a conversation and that everyone is aligned and all the society is following the same approach. So just before ending, as I mentioned, the Capitals Coalition is a collaboration initiative. So you are all welcome to collaborate with us. We organize many webinars and all our projects are collaborative and all the feedback from everyone is welcome. You can also benefit and learn from all the materials that we have, our newsletter. You can see many case studies of how the Capitals approach is applied and is helping to inform better decisions. You can also, if you are from business, from finance, from governments, apply this approach with all the materials that we have in our webpage. And also everyone can contribute to our work. We have many events, as I mentioned. We have our coalition's strategy day, and everyone is welcome. And you can inform and help us to define our strategies in the future. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the discussion later and the questions from the audience. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Marta. That was very, very interesting. I think it's actually a very good example of how this regenerative movement needs a transformation of the system. I've always been a little bit critical of the conservation movement because you protect what's there, but what's already damaged doesn't really change. So I think it's very important to generate these systems change to try to go beyond just protecting or conserving what's the nature that's there. And also of cross-sectorial collaboration, as Anna mentioned before. How do we engage with the private sector? How do we engage with different stakeholders that do have a role to play in these transformations? Because it has to be mainstreamed across all the different sectors. So thank you very much for those insights. I already have a couple of questions for all of you, but I will keep them after we all have our presentation so we can go in a more fluid conversation. Right now, I would like to welcome Nina Pawlicki, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Pawlicki. You can correct me if not.
Pawlicki.
Pawlicki. Okay, good.
I'm used to it.
No, it happens, but that's why I always ask. Nina has been teaching and she's been a research associate at TU Berlin since 2013. And before with a habitat unit and since 2017 in the Natural Building Lab. Her doctoral thesis is about assessing approaches of transdisciplinary collaboration in architectural education. And with her work, she is facilitating intercultural, hands-on and community-based projects in an interface between academia and non-academia. Again, cross-sectoral and collaboration between sectors. And through transdisciplinary approaches, she's seeking how community engagement processes can be led to designing more inclusive, diverse learning environments. The main objective of this is to develop contextual, sustainable, and locally appropriate strategies to build solutions. And she is an architect from the TU Berlin and the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile. And as part of an international consortium, she co-initiated and co-directed the development of an online platform, DBX Change EU. And she's also an architect and researcher and involved in building projects in Mexico, Jordan, Mongolia, Germany, and Colombia. So she has a lot of international insights that she puts into her work. So welcome, Nina, and you have 10 minutes for your presentation.
Okay, muchas gracias. Solamente cortito, siempre un gran gusto trabajar con Low Carbon City y bueno, muchos saludos a Colombia. I'll also switch to English then. So thank you very much. I think like a lot of my background has been explained already. So just to give you a bit of a framing, the Natural Building Lab is based at the School of Architecture at TU Berlin, Technical University here. We are by profession, we are architects and also working with architecture students, but like the topics, we kind of compiled a few of them here, are based on, well, like rather seeing ourselves as part of a society and as well what we can contribute to a transforming society as architects or planners. So deriving coming to our mission, I think that, like, for the people here, there is something that is very obvious and not big news, that the global challenges that we are facing right now are forcing us to radically rethink the way that we live and we work. And if we look ahead on what has, like, our consumption and what our work is, especially like in the built environment, has been based on, we are that was very much on fossil resources. We are facing a whole new challenge now, with the peak oil already having been reached, or being reached quite soonish. And so coming into a different age and to a post-fossil age as well. And we also believe in there's a common sense that there needs to be a change. But the question is rather, how does this change look, and how can we really embed solutions that are looking forward, and that are also, well, as the topic of this panel is, rather working in a regenerative way. So as planners, we also see that these responses or the solutions can only be effective if they are acknowledged by a multiplicity of actors and as well of disciplines, and that highly depends on the way that we discuss and develop them. So for us, one principle as architects, or one key quote that I like to show to the students as well, is that architecture mass is the law, or that's what it should be. Probably not in an aesthetic sense of way, but rather describing the complex settings that architecture planning is based in, which is a complex setting of social and institutional mess. So if we look at urban developments, like for example, our beloved Moravia in Medellín, it's quite easy to see that the planning is never easy, it's never clean, it's never a single issue, it's never like certain and never controllable. And so we also need to work in a way that is acknowledging this complexity, and is getting away from, say, a hero architect point of vision, more into someone who's co-authoring and co-designing. So what that means as an approach to what we are doing, we believe that has been said here quite a lot, that the emphasis should be on the ecological, economic, and also the collaborative and processual aspects of making space. And that, for on the one hand, is referring to creating consciousness for depleting resources, working in a sector which is responsible for, at least in Europe, 25 to 30% of the waste generated, and as well a lot of the percentage of energy that is being used in operating buildings. So on the one hand, this is on the waste that is referring to, well, more the resource as in a material kind of matter, but also in the way how we design urban spaces, how we design buildings to make them look into the future, and also to make them be part of the transformation process. So another aspect of our work, working on the interface between academia and non-academia. Unfortunately, this is in German, but actually it doesn't really matter. I guess it shows as well that this interrelation, or this working at the interface, is allowing us to also take steps back and not always be part of the only of in a market logic kind of thinking, and also as planners thinking in a holistic way and getting engaged. So seeing us as part of a bigger movement, so seeing us as part of society, and as well of our environment. And by that, creating spaces that are also in a way at this interface that I described before. So for example, what we designed with the students is this mobile hub that can be transported by
Nina,
cargo bikes. Yeah.
Just we're only seeing the first slide of your presentation, so I don't know if you're
Seriously?
searching in your computer and
Okay, that is a pity because I've been showing you a lot of nice images.
oh, I thought, okay, do you want to
Okay,
stop sharing and then share again?
Yeah, maybe, or
Okay, there you go.
can
we
you now
see
see?
it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So. So that is the mobile hub that you haven't seen before then, which is actually now it's, you can see a bit, huh? Which is actually this transport system that can be transported by cargo bikes, and which can create a mobile outpost in the city, and also allow us to work not only in, like, let's say, the office or the school, but also outside and get into this communication. The tools we are using, on the one hand, the natural building systems and circular construction principles, referring to natural building materials that are locally available and allow us to design energy efficient, low carbon buildings for post-fossil future. For us, that is mainly what we call the big three. So the use of timber, which is right now quite on the rise as well, urban timber construction, and as well of natural fibers and earth construction. Another tool would be the collaboration, what we also like to call the big circle method. So a collaboration working on an eye level between different disciplines, but also between different, let's say, groups that would be important, well, especially in urban settings, important actors, actor groups in a project, in the project itself, and also to work in agile and from organization formats, on agile working formats, in order, especially with students, what we believe that is part of the rather a method of how to work in the future, to create more alignment and more self-determined learning processes. So now that might be the most important, that you see some pictures of the prototypes that we've created. Here, one would be the Taller Tropical, which is this building that is set in the neighborhood of Moravia in Medellín. Actually, my colleague Albert will talk about it tomorrow as well in a panel, a bit more about this, the collaboration between Medellín and Berlin. But just to show you a few images. So set in, as I described, in the neighborhood, it is actually part of, or it is a second floor on an existing rooftop that we built with local craftsmen, with students from Colombia and Berlin. And that is an open workshop, and then also a place that the schools can use, that is on the one hand talking a lot about the topics of nutrition and conscious nutrition and food production, and also showing examples of what can be done with natural building materials. In this example, it's the guadua, the bamboo. Another prototype, and that's actually why it's a bit loud here in my background, because I'm just sitting right in it. In the center of this is the Infozentrale auf dem Vollgut, which is set in a development area in the heart of Berlin-Neukölln, where the task was to design a small pavilion that is allowing interaction for with the neighborhood, that should be made of waste material. So the students did actually a lot of research on what can be used as waste material to really use it as a building material, and then do a design from that. They harvested old wood, reworked the old wood, and then built a structure which is basically a roof on four 4 columns. I don't want to explain that too technically. But a percentage of this wood is used wood that had been used in before in a rooftop construction. Bit of it is new, so that's how it looked when it was lifted up. And then the walls are actually made from cardboard from the supermarket. That's just some testing. They are insulated with shredded paper that we would get from the school here, and then covered with poster material. So it also works as a, let's say, billboard in the neighborhood to create a place of exchange, and also to create a place of discussion about the recent developments in the area. So that's the nice architecture pictures that you publish. And what the project really does for us is that it's, and that's as well why I would like to call it prototype in this sense, is that it's creating a network of different actors, all of these actors that are involved in just creating this tiny little project here. And is there with as well talking a lot about what you can do and what the potential of this design is. And just the last image, so that's how it looks now. So also being part of, I guess that's also coming back to the quote of Messes the Law, and a place that can be adapted in an urban space and can be adapted to its uses, and also provide a potential space for really getting engaged yourselves as a neighbor or someone using the place. Okay, so I'm sorry you did only see half of the presentations, but there were at least a few images that you got.
Thank you very much, Nina, and I apologize for letting you know just mid presentation. I saw there were more slides, but I wasn't sure if you were giving an introduction, and then when you mentioned the picture, I said, maybe, yeah, there's a mistake, but that's all right.
Oh, fine.
I'm sure the organizers will share the presentation as well with the participants. I really like, we're doing a zoom in, as many of you might have seen. We had like a more contextual explanation of what's going on, then some tools of how we can start changing the system, and now zooming into examples of how regenerative development and design can be applied to different cases and different scenarios. And I really like what Nina has shown us, because it gives a specific attention to one of the principles of regenerative development, that's to honor communities and places. And I think we have very good examples there of how you're engaging with the community and how you're working with them to build different places and to honor those places with local materials and with the local people. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But before we close the presentations, we're gonna go with Sam Teicher. Thank you, Nina. And Sam is the co-founder and chief reef officer at Coral Vita, which is a coral restoration organization. They're restoring the world's threatened and dying coral reefs by growing resilient corals and transplanting them into degraded sites. They create high-tech coral farms that incorporate breakthrough methods to restore reefs in the most effective and possible way, so that they can grow coral up to 50 times faster while boosting their resiliency against climate change and acidifying oceans that threaten their survival. Sam graduated from Yale College, and he served as a chief operating officer in Eli Africa, a nonprofit in Mauritius. And then he helped launch a coral farming project in partnership with the Mauritius Oceanography Institute, before founding Coral Vita, sorry. He also interned for the White House Council on Environmental Quality's Climate Preparedness team, and he served as a fellow in the Global Island Partnership. And he was recognized as one of the 22 climate trailblazers in the 2018 Global Climate Action Summit. So welcome, Sam, and we look forward to your presentation. We can't hear you. Hmm. Nope. Maybe. If not, maybe you can try to disconnect and connect. Okay, I think he did so. Maybe while Sam comes back, also something that I'd like to highlight is how, again, the issue of collaborative processes and intersectoral collaboration has been coming up in the different presentations. And I think this is one of the key elements to start generating transformations. Not one sector or not one actor can make these changes. So I really like how this panel has been able to highlight that and identify different stakeholders and can collaborate. Sam is back. Let's see if he can connect.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. The wonders of Zoom. Gracias a Low Carbon City y mis compañeros y el gente para su tiempo. Hablo como un gringo, entonces voy a hablar en inglés. As was mentioned, I co-founded Coral Vida, which is a company that's working to restore our world's dying reefs. So I'm going to share sort of our vision, the problem that we're tackling as an example of how I think there's a real way to transform how a lot of businesses can work to sustain these ecosystems that in turn take care of all of us. So let me pull up my presentation. All right, so full screen real quick. So can you guys see this? All right. So if we take a step back for a second and obviously acknowledge the wonder of coral reefs from an ecological perspective, they are one of the most important and valuable ecosystems on the planet. As we sort of heard earlier about natural capital, reefs on their own, taking up less than 1% of the ocean floor, sustain a quarter of all marine life, and take care of the livelihoods of up to 1 billion people around the world. Generating $30 billion a year conservatively through tourism and fisheries and coast protection. And when we think about COVID, there are already medicines that have been developed derived from medicinal compounds found in coral reefs, just like we hear about ones that come from tropical rainforests. The problem is that reefs are dying. So half of the world's coral reefs are already dead, and we are currently on track to lose over 90% by 2050. 100 nations around the world, from Colombia to the Bahamas to Australia to the Maldives, everywhere reefs are dying. There's a lot of local factors that are contributing to this, but moving forward, climate change, rising temperatures, and acidification really are already taking their toll on reefs. The good news is there are forms of adaptation through coral restoration, where similar to planting trees that can bring forests back to life, corals can be grown and then transplanted back out into degraded sites. There's amazing organizations around the world that have been doing this for 20 years, including one in Colombia. I encourage everyone to check out Corales de Paz. The thing though is the current model for restoration is largely small scale. You have these underwater gardens that don't really sort of have the ability to grow most species, and they have to be set up and maintained near each site. And it's largely donation and grant funded. So basically you've got small scale one-off projects around the world, which doesn't meet the needs of 90% of reefs dead within the next 30 years. So that's why I founded Coral Vida with my friend and co-founder, Gator Halpern. And our approach is commercializing reef restoration while integrating breakthrough methods to grow more diverse and resilient coral. So there's a few different techniques that we use on the ecological side where we can accelerate growth rates, strengthen the resiliency to threats like warming and acidifying oceans, and also boost the genetic diversity of the corals themselves. So to start off with microfragmenting, it's basically like scar tissue. We can cut up the corals into little pieces and it activates a healing process, and the corals fuse back into themselves. We cut them up, fuse back together, and suddenly some corals that would grow from a sort of a coin to a dinner plate in 25, 50 years, we can grow in 1 or 2 years. It's a game changer for increasing the diversity of corals that can be grown for restoration projects. With our farms being based on land, we have the ability to integrate some methods that are referred to as assisted evolution. Many of these are still sort of ongoing in terms of the research. There's many brilliant scientists around the world investigating this, but at the very least, because we control the temperature, for example, in our tanks, we can mimic future ocean conditions and basically take the corals to the gym, so that when we outplant them, they already are used to what warming oceans in the future will be like, and that's been shown by others to help them survive better. And then also, corals make babies. It usually happens after the full moon. It's a really fascinating process that I can tell people about later, but it's also really difficult. In general, it takes about 1 million eggs to produce 1 adult coral in the wild. And at our farms, we got that ratio down from 1 million to 1 to 100 to 1. Which is really important because every new coral is basically a new genotype, so that when we outplant corals, it's not just sort of monoculturing. We're really ensuring that there's more genetic diversity out there as well. Then the other approach is doing this as a business. So thinking back to the tourism and fisheries and coastal protection value of reefs, I've been a diver since I was a kid. The ocean is enough for me, but unfortunately the environmental argument doesn't work for most people. So we are looking at that value and have 2 main parts of our business. One is selling reef restoration as a service to hotels, insurance companies, governments, corporate sponsors. Everyone that depends on or has interest in those ecosystem services of reefs can hire Coral Vita to restore the reefs they depend on. And then our farms are based on land. So as we grow corals to restore the reefs, we turn them both into education centers for local communities, students, fishermen, try and build local capacity and empower the communities that most depend on the reefs. And then also into revenue generating tourism attractions. People pay entrance fees, they can adopt coral, they can even go out and plant corals. And using that approach, we think we can transform this into actual industry that's self-sustaining, where funding can be unlocked to do the needed ecosystem scale restoration projects to help keep reefs alive for the future. It's also worth saying the best thing to do for reefs is to stop killing them. We need to solve climate change and end pollution, but we also need to scale up adaptation solutions, because in particular for the ocean, even if tomorrow we turned off emissions, the temperatures will keep rising. So our approach is to scale up these restoration and adaptation solutions so that reefs can survive until more effective mitigation measures get put into place. So just to tell you a little bit more, we launched our first farm in Freeport, Grand Bahama. It was really an amazing success. I don't need to spend a lot of time on this, but just we raised probably the first ever private investment round for reef restoration and partnered with the government of the Bahamas. I mentioned before we had success with the reproduction of the corals. We also are growing 24 species. Most projects in the Caribbean grow 3 to 5. And then on the business side, we had in the sort of few months after we launched this first farm in May of 2019, we had 1,000 students and tourists come through the farm, and big tourism groups wanting to market our farm as a destination. We were negotiating restoration contracts. We were really proving out the model. And if you didn't know, Grand Bahama was one of the 2 main islands that was hit last year by Hurricane Dorian. I was there for it. I don't recommend staying for Category 5 hurricanes. Thankfully, I was fine in my house, but our farm was 10 minutes away and it was under 18 feet of water, in addition to obviously the devastation it did to the communities across the island. And it set us back, to say the least. So what it also did, though, was underscore just how important healthy ecosystems are. Coral reefs aside, we met people when we were doing humanitarian work who attributed mangrove forests to saving their lives, because like coral reefs, they slow down the wave energy enough for them to get to their neighbor's house, to get to the higher ground, or to climb into trees. So as much of a setback as it was for us, it really just underscored how important it is to keep reefs alive, because they keep people alive through food and clothes and shelter. And I'm happy to share it's not all bad. We did rebuild what was damaged. We reopened our farm in March, just in time for COVID. But what we decided in that moment was, rather than just going back to the pilot, let's take the next step forward and scale it into the most high-tech, state-of-the-art, and possibly largest coral farm in the world, because our ultimate vision is to launch these farms in every nation with reefs, to work with the private sector, governments, local communities, scientists, NGOs to create a sort of collaborative effort and jumpstart a restoration economy where we can take care of these ecosystems that sustain all of us. So we're in the process right now of raising a new investment round of $2 million to launch to expand the farm. And then just to sort of wrap up a little bit more about who we are, as was mentioned before, I won't talk about myself, but we really built a team of scientists and local Bahamians, and working, as I said, in partnership with other marine institutes to try and scale this vision in the Bahamas. Around the world, we're working with technologists, scientists, roboticists to bring in a whole sense of sort of a new vision in terms of how we can take care of these ecosystems that, again, take care of all of us. So to wrap it up again, we rebuilt the farm, we're growing corals again, getting ready to expand it, and eventually want to do this around the world, including in Colombia. And just to sort of end thinking about, again, where we're at in society right now is certainly an inflection point. This is the UN declared 2020s as the decade of ecosystem restoration. It's Climate Action Week now, and not enough is being done to mitigate climate change. So as those solutions come online, we all need to sort of, I think, re-envision how we can change our economies and change our practices in a way that benefits local peoples and then benefits the ecosystems that we all rely on. And I really do appreciate your time, and hopefully you'll all be able to come plant some coral with us one day.
Thank you very much, Sam. I really liked bringing in something from Marta's presentation, how you have built a business model around natural capital. And at the end of the day, something that's usually very difficult to pitch and to sustain when doing conservation or regeneration work is trying to convince people why this is important. But if you build a business model around it and design it as a service or as something that interests other stakeholders and speaks their language, it's much more feasible, and it can be sustained for longer, and it can be very much successful. So I think it's a very good example of being able to translate what you're doing to the language of other people who might be affected or interested in funding, etc. So thanks for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
Just now, I would like to just open the conversation with the rest of the panelists. Something that I like to do is just contextualize all of this and bring it back to that introduction I made before about cities and how in the context of a biodiversity crisis and in the context of a climate crisis, apart from the health and economic crisis we have right now, the importance of cities in these transformations and in this paradigm shift. And maybe starting with Anna, what I would like to ask her was, there's something that I like to call like the green-gray divide. We're still conceptualizing cities as something that's different from nature and almost antagonistic, like cities versus nature, and there's something that can't mix there. How do you suggest we leave behind that green-gray divide, and how do we merge a little bit the regeneration principles and bringing in and blurring the lines between nature and cities, and how do you envision that role of cities as contributors rather than destructors of a regenerative approach, and also in the context of the zero draft of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework?
Yeah, thank you very much. And well, for example, in Colombia, we have a very fantastic examples and all around the world with green cities and very good approaches for sustainability in cities. What we have to understand is that the urban areas are ecosystems. Now, are not truly natural ecosystems, but are ecosystems that we are creating and based on the nature that is in place there. So we cannot put apart the artificial ecosystem that we are creating with the natural ecosystems that are the basis in urban areas. So taking that into consideration, we have to mobilize ourselves to first understand the dynamics of this artificial natural ecosystem that is the urban areas. The second one is on how all the people that lives inside or have pressures in that areas can support actions for restoration, regeneration. If we see trees in our cities, if we hear birds in our cities, it's because we have living cities, so we have biodiversity in our cities. But if we have also a river in Bogota, for example, and we use that river as just a place for garbage, then we are destroying our own capacity to live in not only in harmony, but to live healthy in our own cities. So it's just a matter of recognizing, what do I see outside my window? What do I see when I have my plate of food? Because all the food that comes from to my table comes also from the rural areas that are near the urban areas. So we have to make that connection, because it's there, it's in the basis, it's something that we have to live with every day. So there is no difference. We have to understand that in our cities, in our towns, we also live with nature, and we have to respect nature.
Thank you very much, Ana. And maybe I would like to go to Nina. Something that we've seen in Costa Rica, at least, is two things. Some of the prototypes and innovative solutions that are coming up, they usually come from academia or private sector, and they're developing these different new ways of doing things. But then there's a gap between that and it becoming mainstream. So first, how would you recommend, or what are your insights on how we can bring these pilot or prototype models and ways of doing more regenerative spaces and more sustainable spaces or buildings to it becoming mainstream, so that all of the spaces can have these characteristics in our cities?
Yeah, you're touching a very crucial point here, because of course the construction sector and the building sector is a monster, and it's very much, there's a lot of money involved, and it's a lot about, doing it the most efficient way. But I believe basically with what we are doing here, and for us, so it's on the one hand, it's communication, and for us, it's very much a topic as well of a future generation of architects and urban planners. Even if you might argue that we don't have the time for that, but we believe, like, with every awareness that we are creating, with like for having a sensitivity for, it's on the one hand, it's material, like resources that you're using that are going into the buildings, but on the other hand, it's also about, how to design urban spaces, how to avoid heat islands in the cities, how to go back to natural systems, not only construction wise, but also, where is a place where you want to stay and where you want to live, like livable cities. And I think that's touching like every one of us. And so that's as well why the communication, I don't really only see within the architectural or the building sector world, but it really needs to be a more more inclusive and a broader discussion to bring that into place, and also to kind of make that political decisions, that like the percentage, like putting a percentage into high efficiency and also into resource efficiency in when you are building. And I mean, in our world here in Europe, actually, if we honestly calculate it, and we have like, you know, our population is not really rising that much anymore. We have built everything, like everything is there. So we kind of only need to, we don't need more resources, new resources to put it, like to go on building, but what we have would be enough. So we really have to think about how to reuse spaces and how to make them more flexible and multi-usage, and also think them in well, their second life, and not only in this one use kind of sense. And yeah, it's a broad that's a broad discussion, but and what I mentioned before, I think the future generation is the one that we really have to sensitize, and that we can see, you know, that the students that have done projects with us and that are now working in mainstream offices, but they just have an awareness, and so they can also take small decisions that might have an effect and trigger discussions.
Thanks. I think you touched upon several things. First is that, like, once we manage to incorporate capacities and a different vision with people who will be in city posts, in regulatory decision-making spaces, there we can get a little bit of that change, but also in showcasing that things can be done differently. You have data and you have an effect and you have something that you can show for a decision maker to change that regulation and being able to make it mainstream. And I also liked something that you said about the European case, or maybe in the global north case, is very different from developing countries, where everything's still growing and the city is transforming and changing every day very, very fast. So the approach in changing spaces in these two contexts is very, very different, but it's also an interesting challenge to work in how regenerative development and design can be different in different contexts, and how we need to really get to work with the local partners and communities and stakeholders to figure out how it can look and how we can adjust it. I wanted to go back to Marta, and we saw the Natural Capital Protocol has a corporate focus. So I'd like to know, like, a little bit of the experience of how the experience has been of how companies are applying the protocol. What results have you had? And also, if there is any, have you envisioned creating something similar for cities as well?
Yeah, great question. Yes, so companies, we piloted the protocol. So the protocol was designed with the support of companies that were testing it. And now we are seeing that there are many companies and a growing movement of companies that are using it. So we have a growing number of applications in our webpage. So our experience is that the first time that the companies are approaching the protocol, they are interested. There is some interest, they heard about it, and they are a bit afraid of doing something new. And they are afraid of the challenges, data, internal support. But once, so what we suggest them and what they are in general doing is taking a kind of simple application, not being very ambitious. So just go for a case study that is doable. Then when they understand the process and they understand the potential of the information that they are obtaining, they grow. So our experience is that they go for something more ambitious, and finally they start integrating it into their strategies and using it more systematically and developing internal resources because at the beginning they depend in external expertise. But then when they embed it and mainstream it, is when they create internal resources in the company to apply it systematically. So that has been our experience since we launched it. And yeah, there is a growing movement, and how we try to promote it is showing the benefits for some companies. So some new companies that we open the conversations with them always ask, which are the companies, which are my peers that are doing this and how it was useful for them. And when they see that is when they feel like, okay, I want to try it. So yeah, there is a growing number. And for the cities, we are really much interested in cities. We have been trying also to find some funding to work on that. So just to give a bit of hope, and also connected with something that Nina mentioned. So we are now working with the construction sector in UK, and they want to standardize kind of an approach to integrate the values of nature, of people and society in all the construction process. And we believe that this is going to help to apply it globally. So it's true that we are talking about two different realities, but I think that as soon, like the same with the companies, when you see that someone is applying it, you want to apply it. So as soon as it's applied in UK, it's going to be applied in, at least in Europe, and probably is going to grow at global level. So that is our hope.
Thanks. And just as a follow-up to that, usually when we talk about transition theories or transformation processes, there's always like a curve, right? And you need to find those early adopters who will take the risk and try something new. And then once other people see that they've done it and that it's good, they'll adopt it. So, and that's actually something that has been researched, and it's very, very, very much used to start trying to generate transformations. How do you find those early adopters? How do you engage with the companies, and how do you identify which ones could be those early adopters, and how do you sell it to them?
So in general, they come to us. So we are, as a collaboration, they approach us, they are interested, we have conversations with them. We are also very active, attending a lot of events. We have also the support of very important institutions that allow us to approach many businesses, and then they contact us. We are also organizing trainings, and that helps. So as now we are working a lot on the transformation, for example, of the food sector, because we consider it a key one. And yesterday we had a training, and we have 30 companies. And at the beginning of the week, we had a training also in Brazil with more than 30 companies. So it's it's a slow process, but naturally they come to us, or through our events, through our trainings, and as you say, so we are growing. And also another important element is to standardize how to do it. So the protocol is a standardized process, but now we need to give another step in standardizing methodologies, be more specific about what should be measured, and we are moving towards that direction to be able to really ramp up the curve.
Perfect, thank you very much, Marta. Maybe going back to Sam and taking a little bit of what we have spoken before of engagement and this pitching something to different actors. I really liked how you identified different stakeholders that can support the project, and there's different approaches on working with each of those. I did miss the city officials, and at the end of the day, it's an interesting conversation, because at the end you can approach the companies and the hotels, etc. But usually the effects that surround the dying corals and the pollution of the ocean, at least locally, usually come from a malfunctioning city or a city that's polluting the ocean. So do you have any strategies, or are you working on approaching the local cities that in which you are working with the coral restoration?
Yes, and not yet. So it's a mixed bag. So I'll sort of frame it in this context. Site selection is key. Not every reef can be restored. As I said earlier, I hope we get put out of business. You know, I hope there's no longer reefs that need restoration. That's not the direction we're trending. But we had a hotel once that was like, this is a perfect attraction for our guests, and we can market it and we'll pay you. But next to their beach was a river, and upstream from that river was a textile factory. And there's no amount of work we can do to restore a reef while those pollutants are still coming in. So making sure that we're working in an area where not only restoration is needed, but restoration is viable is key. And yeah, there's partnerships that we form with the local government in Grand Bahama. It's actually a private development company that has a free trade zone. It's a very odd situation, but basically the free trade zone of Singapore was modeled after Freeport. there's a private company that's like a quasi-governmental organization who we engaged with that was very excited about our vision for conservation, sustainable development, and then the government of the Bahamas came on board. So ultimately, we hope that through our work, we can showcase, oh, wow, reefs really are that important. Look at the difference between this dead reef and what happened afterwards. Because of, I think, another problem we contend with in many of these situations is shifting baselines. I'm going to just briefly go on a tangent, but come back to your question. Like I once went on a dive in the Florida Keys, which used to be like the most exquisite reef in America, and 95% of it's dead. And I went with someone who dove there in the 70s, a couple that had never gone diving before, and myself, who had never seen it what it once was, but could have imagined it. And the guy who dove in the 70s came up pretty much crying. My breath was taken away. And the couple who were new to diving were like, oh my God, did you see that grouper? That was amazing. And so if we're able to showcase the difference between what we're used to seeing reefs as now to how we can restore them and what they should be, I mean, we ultimately, again, hope that that will encourage people to protect them in the first place. That's why we incorporate education into our work to ensure that people are, well, instead of restoring these reefs, let's protect them. And through that, we definitely hope to advocate to governments and cities to clean up their act. But I also said yes and not yet, because as a business, it's also tough to like run a business and also basically be a lobbyist shop. So there's a balance that we haven't been able to strike yet as an early stage social enterprise to do a lot of the advocacy work that's important, which is again why we rely on building our partnerships with NGOs and other actors so that collaboratively we can push things forward in an effective way.
Perfect, thanks. No, that's great. We're running a bit out of time, but I have one last question that I think might be interesting. One of the drivers of biodiversity loss, which is rarely thought of, or at least in urban conversations, is invasive species and exotic species that are sort of like pushing out the local species in different ecosystems. And as Anna said, a city is an ecosystem, even if we don't think of it as an ecosystem. So this one I will just like throw it out there. Maybe Nina or Anna might have some ideas on this. And it's something that we've faced also in Costa Rica, trying to engage with regenerating cities and having, for example, private developers or the private sector trying to incorporate biodiversity criteria into the way they're doing new developments, is how to use local species rather than exotic or invasive species. If you go to nurseries or to commercial places that sell plants, they're usually not local plants, or they're not local species. So how can we strengthen and transform the go-to places that the private sector goes to bring green into that gray of urban development? And how can we also engage with local communities and strengthen the capacities and the regulation even to try to capitalize and value that natural capital of our ecosystems as something that we can bring into cities rather than just use commercial and exotic species that don't bring in anything of value to the ecosystems?
Okay, well, let me start first. It's a very interesting question because for me, it's a matter of education and capacity building. So if we educate our children about the pets and what kind of pets we can have, if we also know about what kind of other species we can have in the aquariums, the terrariums, for example, will be very important. But also we have to need to capacitate the people that is working, for example, in the greenhouses and producing seeds, producing plants, and of course, reproducing species. There is a huge capacity. We have scientific institutions, we have the academia that is working a lot with that. We have organizations that are working with that around the world. And of course, the botanical gardens, for example, the zoos, for example, can give us a lot of help in creating capacity, in educating people, and in advising when we are going to use biodiversity for different purposes. They can bring us a very good advice, what to use and when to use. So I think that we already have the materia prima, but also we need to seek for that support because it's very important. And we don't have to believe that the exotics are better than the natives. We have to learn to not only cultivate and use what is comes from our surroundings and comes from our natural environment, but also we have to believe that is the best for us. So that also is a cultural matter. So thank you.
Nina, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I'm not very a specialist on it, but I just would touch on two points maybe. So the one point would be to include green in city planning, which is not only for biodiversity. I mean, it's also for just city climate issues. I mean, it should actually be obligatory. So, and I'm not only talking about parks, but also about green facades, green roofs, and stuff like that. That is one point. And the other point, what we've seen with Corona is also to kind of know our limits a bit more. So to be aware of urban sprawling and, you know, taking more and more of the ground, using more of the ground to create urban spaces, and rather think about, you know, how can we create livable, dense cities that are still that are still livable, but be aware of this, of every square millimeter that we are using to for our, well, urban places. And so to also define borders and make it, you know, I don't really know the technical terms, but to think more in, you know, which the bio system is living where, is living in which area, or to dedicate it to. It was probably for professionals very very badly said, but okay, thank you. I know you know what I'm talking about.
Thanks, Nina.
I thought I would just jump in. Actually,
yeah, go ahead.
It's obviously there's not many coral reefs in cities, though there are often coral reefs off of cities in the tropics. In Cartagena and Miami, we often think of them far flung in the distance, but there often are really remarkable things near cities, and especially if it's an area with storms, they're really important for protecting against storm surges, but fishing, tourism, all that stuff. But I just thought I'd mention, for us, we always use native coral species. So in the Bahamas, we're only using corals that are found in the Bahamas. But just in terms of a interesting time we live in, which I'd hope is still in an optimistic sense, things have gotten so bad with reefs that there are actual discussions happening about taking heat resilient corals from the Red Sea to repopulate the Great Barrier Reef. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. And there's plenty of reasons why we shouldn't do that. But if you had that conversation with a lot of coral scientists 5 years ago, you probably would have been chased out of a room with pitchforks. So as someone who definitely appreciates the value and the importance of highlighting native species, if we're faced with the question of no reefs at all or only native reefs, it's an interesting thing to consider. But having friends who work in cities as well, I think it's a really great question that you brought up. And I do think it's so important to think about also just how people plant in their home gardens and their lawns, you know, the opportunity to grow those native species, because that's where they're meant to be and they can offer so many benefits. So I appreciate you asking that question.
Oh, thanks so much. I throw it in there because we've noticed it a lot, and people are already, we're more used to, like, recycling or local materials and more about like materials, but at the end of the day, our gardens are usually using exotic species and not contributing to having like a mainstreamed greenery in cities that contributes to a regeneration of the species we've lost and to the growth of a biodiverse city. So it's a very interesting conversation to have. We are running out of time, so I would just like to touch about some of the key messages that I've heard from all of you, and I'll also ask you at the end to have like only a closing statement. Not very long. I'll tell you how to do that. But I think one of the key messages we've seen is protecting is not enough. Protecting sort of keeps that paradigm of I protect here and I damage here. And it's usually that green-gray divide that we've seen historically of cities just growing as machines and with no control. And then the protected areas sort of just backing up and receiving all of those impacts surrounding them, right? So we need to go beyond protecting and then think of that regrowth. How we are familiar with reforestation, but how do we regrow corals? How do we regrow ecosystems within contexts that we usually wouldn't think of having ecosystems and having biodiversity? And also thinking about consolidating agendas and thinking about how a regenerative environment will help us with health, will help us with well-being, would help us with competitiveness and with a more productive city or society, etc. We've talked a little bit about regulation and how regulation and having certain things from the top-bottom perspective can help us mainstream a lot of these changes, because bottom-up efforts can help to create awareness and to create capacities and to create experiences and showcase things are possible. But unless that comes up to the political sphere and have policy and regulation, it's very hard to mainstream these changes. So I think we've caught up on that a little bit, but it's super valuable to have bottom-up initiatives to showcase and to say, okay, this is what we need to do. This is the results that we're achieving. Let's put this into that regulation. But definitely action needs to come from different stakeholders and different levels of our society. Let's keep thinking of cities as ecosystems and how we can regenerate and improve those ecosystems for both for people and planet. And I would like each of you to say in a question or phrase, very short, for now in the short term, what needs to be done to get closer to a regenerative development model? What would be like the key first step, at least, that you would take? Who wants to go first?
Educate policymakers and policy, business, and media leaders on the opportunity that exists to create sort of the communities and jobs and economies of the 21st century that also contribute to just a healthier home and planet.
Thanks, perfect.
I want to compliment, and I want to say that not only educate policymakers, but because we are all decision makers, from the little child to the eldest. So we have to educate all our society. And we have to learn to listen the science. We have to learn to listen the practices, and we have to act. We cannot just read and that's it. We already know what's going on, and we have the scenarios and we have the choices. It's only in our hands to take the opportunity for a better future.
Thank you.
Very much aligned with Ana Maria. I was going to say that I was talking about the decisions of business, finance, governments, but I think that we have to realize that each of us, in every decision that we are taking in our life, we have to recognize the power of change. So we are drivers of change. So let's think in the consequences in every small detail, the plant that we are planting in our garden, the public or if the transport media that we choose to move to some places. So in every decision of what we eat, we can really change and have contribute to change and regenerate the system.
Thank you, Nina.
Yeah, agreeing with all of you. I think we should be brave and be ambitious and do jumps and avoid concrete as much as possible. And while we're doing these jumps, we should also not forget to communicate and to discuss and to take like everyone around us with us and consider them in the process.
Well, thank you very much to all of you. I would like to rescue, we are all decision makers. I really like that. And let's aim for transformative action, not just gradual and small steps. Let's be ambitious. And from any space that we are working on, we don't need to be a politician. We don't need to be a mayor. From every space that we are working on or studying or whatever in our families, we have a power and we have a transformative power. So let's speak of these things as often as possible, and let's talk with the people who we trust and we love of how to change things and how to start doing things differently. And we can't stop. We can't afford to stop. We don't have time to stop, and we need to start trying to change this right now and yesterday and 2 weeks ago and from here on. So thank you, all of you, panelists and participants, for your contributions to this discussion, and we'll continue with the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Andrea, mil gracias. A Marta, a Sam, Ana María, Nina, muchas gracias de nuevo por habernos acompañado en este evento y por su contribución a este movimiento ciudadano que busca justamente divulgar el conocimiento, conectarnos y buscar la manera de generar nuevos proyectos y procesos que puedan impactar nuestros territorios. Finalmente quiero hacerles una invitación a quienes no han podido estar conectados a todos nuestros eventos anteriores, que todo esto queda registrado en el canal de YouTube para que se suscriban y puedan ver las presentaciones anteriores. Y finalmente hacerles una invitación para la agenda de mañana, la de hoy en la tarde y la de mañana. Hoy en la tarde vamos a darle la voz a los niños, porque los niños casi siempre quedan relegados y quedan por fuera de estas conversaciones, y es muy importante también escuchar sus voces. Vamos a tener a activistas entre los 7 y los 10 y los 11 años a las 2:30 de la tarde, y es muy importante que escuchemos pues también lo que ellos tienen para decir, cómo se están imaginando su futuro, cómo se imaginan el presente también, y ellos son finalmente los arquitectos de esta civilización regenerativa. Entonces los invitamos a conectarse a las 2:30. Y también a las sesiones de mañana. Mañana empezamos a las 9 de la mañana, ¿cierto? Mañana empezamos a las 9 de la mañana. Nuestro panel será sobre resiliencia y recuperación post-COVID. Y posteriormente, en la tarde, a las 2 de la tarde, será nuestro panel sobre ciudadanía transformativa, generando transformaciones. Y finalmente a las 4 de la tarde los invitamos a conectarse de nuevo para firmar esa declaración ciudadana a la que estamos invitando a todos, para que en esa declaración nos sirva como herramienta de incidencia ante nuestros tomadores de decisiones, que es una declaración construida con todos esos mensajes que hemos recibido de ustedes, y que tendremos pues disponible en las redes de Low Carbon City. Entonces, de nuevo, muchas gracias a todos, gracias por acompañarnos y nos vemos más tarde a las 2:30. Una feliz tarde.
Gracias, que tengan buen día.